Chapter 7 of Almond-Blossom. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Almond-Blossom by Wadsley. Chapter 7. Oh, grown-ups cannot understand, and grown-ups never will, how short's the way to fairyland across the purple hill, and yet, at just a child's command, the world's an Eden still. Alfred Noyes. In his own rooms, memory assailed Tony. The insidious spell of the house which had roofed his ancestors, which had come down to him as a heritage, began to make itself evident. He had again that old satisfying feeling of belonging somewhere, the feeling which will call a man from happiness, richest, the farthest place on earth. Tony had never known he had missed his house, but he knew it now. He leant far out of the window in his bedroom, and the scent of the earth came to him, and made him draw his breath sharply. The ivy rustled in the night wind. That disembodied feeling, which it is possible to experience after a fresh shock, complete change from one place to another, possessed him. He was able to contrast, as if he passed from one land to the other, the clearing he had called home in Saiwunga, and this real home. He could still see the grass growing like spears, glittering in the blazing moonlight, still hear the jungle cries, faint, mysteriously eerie. Here the roses blew in the starshine, and the bells chimed over the fields. But even in this tranquillity he did not find complete satisfaction. He had been robbed of the nearness of immediate association, and as one can feel an illogical regret upon saying good-bye, when in reality one is aware one will experience a genuine relief directly the actual separation has taken place. So now Tony felt almost an aggrieved sense of forlornness. He walked about the room. There was a picture of Francesca on the walls, and below it a portrait of Rex. He stared into Francesca's face. He had not forgotten, but he had not, during the last year, remembered very much. He was 7 years older. He found himself thinking how pretty she had been, pretty as paint. His mind stirred unhappily. What was the good of remembering? Besides, he had cultivated a knack of slamming down a little door in his mind on all thoughts that bothered. He slammed it now. If one did not, memories of loneliness assailed one, and they were hideous. Even with the door slammed, ghosts crept sometimes. He stared out at the softly shadowed park, above which the star-jewelled sky hung like a benison. He would take on the farms, run the place, live for it. During the voyage home, he had planned the future that way. It was a relief to find he could pursue his purpose. A thought of Pasquale drifted across his mind. Odd that he still felt as he did towards him. Pan did not fit, that was it. It would be decent to see old Charles again sometimes. His life abroad seemed to have loosed him from all sense of responsibility. Greville said of him to G, maliciously smiling, "As an example of a broken heart, Tony is rather disillusioning, what?" "He is atrophied," G returned quickly. "It is a tragedy, Pan, but I fail to find it an amusing one." Her whole mind was absorbed by the thought of the future, Rex's first, then Doro's, for she had a genuine regard for her. She would naturally suggest her own departure at an early date, and the idea of Rex, dependent on Tony for every interest, was poignantly distressing. All through the summer night she lay awake and worried. With the morning sleep came, and hardly had it come, it seemed to poor G, than Rex arrived also. Regularly each morning he accompanied her cup of tea. Today he sat with bare feet, clad in his pyjamas, and poured out. "I love the scentiness of your room, darling," he said conversationally. "It smells like you do, sandalwoody, and bunches of flowers." He climbed down and limped to G's dressing table, and gravely sprayed himself from an atomizer containing jasmine perfume. "I like you looking the same in bed as up too," he remarked. Emilia's an awful hijisuggy in bed." Hijisuggy was a word the children had made. It belonged to the Nick language, and was entirely understood. "Really?" G said absently. "Yes, really. She has paper hair things, but you look darling." "You flatter me." "Well, you like it, my love, don't you?" Rex inquired carelessly, taking a spoon carefully round the jam dish. G laughed with pleasure in him. He was so sweet and queer and natural. He looked up, licking the spoon enjoyably. "That's better," he said a little inarticulately. "I love you laughing. Your eyes go like black stars." "Ever seen a black star?" G asked, pretending to study a letter. "No, but I can think them." "Do you think many things like black stars?" "'Bout Doro and you, I do. Doro's darling to look at too." "My friend, you begin early." "Early what? Can I have that bit of toast?" "Yes, but you will spoil your own breakfast." "Yes, but it isn't toast and this sort of jam, so it doesn't matter." He slid forward a little when he had finished the toast, and leant his head back on G's shoulder. The adorable littleness and trust of him swept over her in a wave of tenderness. "What made you choose this cherry pie coloured silky thing?" he asked, pulling the fringe of G's dressing jacket. "And have a bow that colour in your hair all done up?" G laughed again. "Darling, I am old as old. But just the same I want to seem as nice as I did when I was very young. In fact, I wish more earnest than I did then to seem nice. One ought to. We all ought. You know, Rex, one's body is a temple in a way, and we are expected to keep it fair. My way of keeping mine so is to have the scents you love, and cherry pie coloured ribbons, and so on, as decoration. Do you see?" Rex stretched luxuriously. A temple," he echoed meditatively, wriggling his toes and studying them. "G, what are my decorations?" G considered him, stumped again by the devilish ingenuity of childhood to bowl googlies in the question line. "Well, you rather liked your overcoat," she hazarded. "And that tie we bought in Paris, the deep blue silk one." A bell rang. Rex sat up and slid an arm about G's neck. "I must be goin', my love," his face very close to hers. They kissed, and he leant a cheek on her silver hair, close to the lilac bow. "I do love you, G." "And I you." He released her and scrambled free. "That's all right, then. I guess my little temple's going to be scrubbed now." G laughed at him with tears in her eyes. "I guess it is. Afterwards decorate it for my sake with a white flannel suit and Paris tie." "All right, darlin'." He went off at a limping run, shouting for Emilia. Sweet came in to dress G, her lugubrious face gloomier than ever. "There'll be sad changes now, ma'am," she remarked with relish. In her heart she was intensely sorry for her mistress, but Sweet's nature was so constituted that any sorrow was its greatest pleasure, just as certain people really only enjoy singing burial hymns and would rather attend a funeral than a matinee. Today she thought G looked her age, and it was not often she did that. She handed a lipstick to her mistress, G's sole aid with the exception of the bistre shadows, and watched with sympathy for once whilst it was applied. Its use was generally reserved for evenings, so Sweet recognized the portent. "Well, may we ask ourselves, ma'am, what the future holds now?" she suggested. "Why?" G snapped. "Is lordship back? So different, so strangely altered." "His lordship had a terrible blow in her ladyship's death." "There's few as memory's so faithful, ma'am. It should be a comfort to us to find it." She began to brush G's thick silver hair, punctuating the even strokes of the brush with comments on life at Hurst Point and in general. "Plans will be changed. Life do seem strange, almost like a sleeper wakened. 7 years gone. "His lordship's fleshier, ma'am. What I ask myself happens now. Wanderers again." "Sweet, be quick," G ordered with asperity. Precisely the same question Sweet had asked had been tormenting her. What was to happen now? Would Tony ask her to remain as chatelaine of his house? Once she could have counted on his consideration. Now he seemed to have forgotten the meaning of the word. She must broach the subject that morning. If the worst came to the worst, Pointers was not very far. Rex could come over and see her often, but she would miss him in the morning and at evening time, and all the time, she confessed wretchedly to herself. She walked into the dining room to find Tony seated there with Doro. Greville breakfasted in his own room. "Tony said I can ride to-day," Doro burst out, "and he'll teach me to drive and hunt. T.G. you've come home, Tony darling." After breakfast, when Rex's tutor, the vicar's boy, down for a long vacation, had taken him off with Doro, G approached Tony definitely. "It will be wiser to have an understanding," she said. Pan had already given notice. He was leaving for town that day en route for heaven knows where, or perhaps not heaven. "Very probably not," G had agreed dryly. Tony offered no comment, made no suggestion. At last, dignified in her driven forlornness, G spoke of returning to Pointers. "I'll take you over," Tony said. She looked at him in dumb amazement. For 7 years, more than 7 years actually, she had sacrificed her entire life to Tony's interests, Tony's children. It is true that his agent and bailiffs had managed the estate, but she had had to superintend their activities. And of course, with regard to Doro and Rex, she remembered that evening years before, when Tony had come to Pointers to ask her help, and she had found him so boring in his dull absorption of grief. Odd that then she had not realized it to be merely the small exercise of a small mind, for it had been that. Tony's whole life had proved it. He had not suffered by reason of a searching vision which had been his. He had suffered without one, and thus narrowed down his feelings to numbness. Not that tragic numbness which is the result of an anti-climax of anguish, but that complacent numbness which has no recollection, no direct spring of existence. She met Tony's bovine look with a quick "Thanks. I'll tell Sweet to pack. I can leave in time for tea, I think." She went in search of Rex later, and they walked to the old rose garden, and G sat on the circular stone seat, warmed through and through by the sunshine, whilst Rex settled on the grass. "I go back to Pointers to-day," she said to him. "Why?" he demanded instantly. "Your father will look after you. He is home, you see, and that arrangement is a right one." "I hate it," Rex said, kneeling up. "Gee, don't you hear? I hate it." "And I too," she longed to cry to him. Instead she said as levelly as she could, "Pointers is quite near." "Pointers isn't breakfast in bed and good night kissing and all the while. It's all the while that matters so. Gee, oh darling, I hate it so. I hate it so." "Darling, don't," G begged. The idea of severance from this rare, yet never very distant, lovely intimacy, which can exist when a child loves and has a tenderness no other love or companionship can possess, made her feel unutterably tired and old. She consoled Rex with a description of future meetings. "Father is not what I'd choose to be left with," Rex said candidly. "You do not know him yet." "No, but I think about him, and that's what I do think." Doro and he argued together in their sitting room about G's departure. "But if G's going, Tony's come, and it balances things, don't you see?" Rex faced her with passionate conviction. "Nothing balances for losing someone you love tight." "But don't you love Tony?" "No." "But he's your father." "I know, but it doesn't matter." Doro drew her straight fine eyebrows together. "But Rex, it ought to." She studied Rex's close-shut mouth. "I love him like anything," she volunteered. "You had room to, you see," Rex said surprisingly, and after that would discuss the point no more. They all drove in with G to Pointer's. Rex stayed behind, the last to kiss her good-bye. Then he ran back as quickly as he could to the car. G found on her pillow a bunch of roses, rather short as to stem, but wrapped in a piece of paper on which was written, "With loads of love from your adoring Rex." End of chapter 7. Recording by Maricel Kui.